ladies and gentlemen, Erin Einhorn. Chalk Beat Detroit.
So in 2014, I was living in New York City, working as an editor at the New York Daily News. And I was living a dream I'd had from childhood. You know, big city, big job, you know, the thrill of the news. And I was completely exhausted. I had just given birth to my second child and was just, overwhelmed with the logistics of, getting two kids up and getting them fed and getting myself dressed and fed and out the door. And I lived in this great neighborhood with good friends, but I never got to spend much time in that neighborhood because I was commuting from Brooklyn into Manhattan, and I didn't get to see much of my kids. My daughter around that time was just a little over 2 years old, and for most of her life, I had been dropping her off at daycare at 8 o'clock in the morning and saying, "See you tomorrow, honey," because she went to bed early and I got home late. And by the time I got there, she was in bed. And I would come home bone tired and devastated that I had yet again missed a chance to see my child. And I would be greeted by a husband who was furious that he had yet again been the only parent there, feeding and bathing and putting to bed this child. And I was upset because I wasn't getting to see her. He was upset because he was seeing too much of her. And there was nothing about this life that resembled a dream. And I was looking for other jobs, trying to find other things, but pretty much everything else out there, it seemed, would have been the exact same thing, the exact same relentless schedule. And in a lot of ways, we felt trapped, by these choices that we'd made that had seemed like really good choices at the time that we were making them. And we wanted out. We needed a solution. And then one morning, it came to me. I was sitting on the subway on my way to a job interview that I actually thought I was going to take. And I realized, I don't want that job. What I want to do, the solution to all of my problems, I'm going to move to Detroit. Now, I knew Detroit was troubled. This was 2014. The city was in bankruptcy. I have a good friend who lived here, and I called him up, and he's like, well, the thing is, you can move to Detroit, but anyone who moves here from a fully functioning city is going to be pretty shocked by how broken it is here. And this is a few years ago. He says, you drive around this city at night, miles and miles, and all you see is darkness. The streetlights are out. He said, you call an ambulance, they might not come. I said, they might not come? Well, that was, disconcerting. But Detroit had this lure for me that dated back a few years earlier, 5 or 6 years earlier. I'd been part of a group of New Yorkers who had all come from the Detroit area. I grew up in the area, and I had sort of bonded with these friends in New York over the fact that we were all from Detroit. And we had been reading about stuff in the city, and we were like, what can we do to help? So we all got together, and we came to Detroit for a couple of days, and we had a whole series of meetings. We met with business leaders and civic leaders and community groups, and what are the needs here that we could help? If we could get all the former Detroiters who are living all over the country, we can get them together, we can help Detroit. What can we do? We had a series of meetings, and then we gathered at a bar. It was actually PJ's Lager House in Corktown. And we're at the bar, and we're comparing notes. Oh, I met with this person, and you met with that person, and oh, I heard this, and you. And it was this really kind of exciting night. We're, finishing each other's sentences. And then all these people in the bar kept coming up to us, like strangers, saying, who are you guys? What are you doing? How can I help? And this is who I am, and this is what I'm doing. And I was like, whoa, Detroit is amazing. It just felt like all these people we were meeting, they were a part of something. And I remember I came home from that trip, and I run into the apartment, and I tell my boyfriend, who's now my husband, I said, oh my God, I got to tell you about this night. We were in this bar, and there were all these people. And he looked at me, he's like, we're not moving to Detroit, right? And I was like, yeah. We had jobs and friends. Our lives were on the East Coast, and there was no plan to leave. But now, 5, 6 years later, we'd gotten married, we'd had baby number 1, we'd had baby number 2, we were living with all these people in a tiny little apartment, and we're feeling trapped in this life. And then there was Detroit. There was this city, this idea, and it just seemed like the solution to everything. I grew up in the area. I have family here. So moving to Detroit with our kids meant our kids could grow up with their cousins and their aunt and their uncles and their grandpa. The lower cost of living meant I could quit my full-time job, become a freelance writer, spend a lot more time with my kids. My husband worked from home, so his job was completely portable. So we sold our place in Brooklyn, we picked up, and we moved to downtown Detroit. And we thought about living in the suburbs. My father and brother live in Royal Oak. But we're city people. My husband and I had both spent our entire adult lives living first in Philadelphia and then in New York. We like the density and the noise and the crowd and the music and the art and the dance and the restaurants and the bars. And we like the people who like those things, and those are the people who live in cities. And so we wanted to live in the city. And there was that night at PJ's that told me if I lived in Detroit, I could be a part of something. So we moved here, and it was great. A lot of things didn't quite live up to the expectations. For starters, the cost of living was not nearly as low as I thought it was going to be. We didn't have a car in New York, and we made it about a week here with 2 kids before we were like, yeah, let's get a car. And then we got a car, and we had to get car insurance. We had to get car insurance in Detroit, and the first time I got a quote from an agent, I was like, wait, what? Like, no, there must be some mistake. That can't be it. But nope, there wasn't a mistake. That's what it costs to insure a car in the city of Detroit. So that was one thing that we didn't expect. The other thing that we didn't quite see coming were the questions from everyone. Our friends, our family, total random strangers. I swear, I went to get my teeth cleaned, and the hygienist was grilling me. And they all had the same question. You live in Detroit with kids? What are you going to do about schools? And it wasn't this curious, like, hey, what are you going to do about schools? It was much more accusatory, as in, what are you going to do about schools? As in, what kind of parent are you? We had moved here in our minds. This move was for our children, to spend more time with our children, to be with our children. And now we're being told, essentially, that moving here was going to hurt our children. There are 140,000 children living in the city of Detroit. And yet we were being told that living here was neglecting them. And, there's a number of differences between my children and many of the other children in Detroit. One of those differences is race. We are the white parents of 2 white children. And most of the people asking us these questions were themselves white. And race wasn't, the questions that we were getting weren't about race, at least not explicitly. But it was in the mix, I think. I was out in West Bloomfield, which is where I grew up, last year, and I ran into a high school classmate. It was actually someone I went to kindergarten with. So we'd spent our childhoods together, and I hadn't seen her in years. So it was, oh, yay, how are you? And we hugged, and, it was this great kind of reunion. And then she kind of, she gets this sort of puzzled look on her face. And I was there with my daughter, I was holding her hand. And she kind of looks at me, and she kind of looks at my daughter. She looks really confused, and she says, you live in Detroit? I was like, yeah. So do they have any schools there with, like, white kids? And I'm like, well, not a lot, there's not many schools in the city of Detroit that enroll a lot of white children. And her question made me really uncomfortable. But, if I'm being honest, I don't love the idea of my kid being the only white child in her class. My daughter's 5 years old. She starts kindergarten in September. And if I send her to school in Detroit, the odds are she's going to look very different from a lot of her classmates. And, but I also hate the idea of her being in a classroom with kids who look exactly like her. And I hate that I have to choose. I hate that we all have to choose. Thank you. To either bear this burden of being different or bear this burden of being the same and not getting to live in the real world. And yet that's the choice, rich, poor, city, suburb, black, white. So I told my friend the same thing I tell a lot of people who ask questions about what I'm going to do for my kids. And I said, honestly, the idea of asking me what I'm going to do about schools for my kid is the wrong question. And I'm the wrong person to ask. And that's because, we live in a state and in a country where the solution that we seem to be getting, that we seem to have gotten over the last 20 years for schools, isn't how or what are we going to do about the fact that many of our schools are in crisis. I mean, the articles that my friends were reading who were asking all these questions were portraying an accurate, real problem that's going on in schools. And what we're by and large getting isn't taking, how do we figure out how to take those schools and make them better? It's a lot more about what are we going to do to help parents get out, right? We need to give parents options. We need to give them, we've got school of choice. So at this moment, and I can benefit from the options. Many, many parents don't have the ability to benefit from those options, but I have a car. And I have an accommodating job. There are hundreds of schools in Detroit and in the surrounding counties where I can get my kid a spot. And I have the time and the resources to figure out where are the best schools for my child, how do I get in. So when I heard about a promising charter school that just opened, that was doing its open enrollment in November, which is months before other schools, I applied. And when I heard that DPS was starting enrollment for the selective schools, I applied. And when I saw that one of those schools seemed to require an essay, I sat down and wrote an essay. I'm assuming they wanted a parent essay because my daughter's 5. And she can write her name and weirdly the word horse, which would be a really short essay about a horse. So I wrote an essay, and so as of this moment, kindergarten's 5 months off for my daughter. She's already enrolled in 4 of what I think are the best elementary schools in Detroit. And I realized that by enrolling in 4 schools, that I'm a part of the problem, right? So, administrators, parents enroll in a whole bunch of schools, and administrators don't really know how many kids are really going to show up, so they can't really do budgeting, they can't figure out how many teachers to hire. And all the parents who aren't, as sort of, on the ball as me, who maybe aren't going to apply to school until next month or the month after, or maybe not even until August or even September, they're going to be told, sorry, we're full, you're on a waiting list, and they're going to end up at a school that might not be quite as good. So, but that's how it's done in Detroit, and so that's how I'm doing it. That doesn't make it right, and it doesn't make it easy, right? There is nothing easy about applying to school in Detroit. And, it is unsettling to think about enrolling my children in a school system that has been in so much turmoil for so long. I went to the parent information session last summer for the new DPS Montessori program. And the interim superintendent was there, and she was saying, she said, my dream for this program is that it's going to grow. So it's in the early grades now, she said, but I see it going up through elementary school, through middle school, even into high school. And I was like, whoa. I think the Montessori method is great. I think it'd be a fantastic fit for my kid. And I was like, I could get a free Montessori education in the city of Detroit through high school? It was just like music to my ears, the best thing I could possibly hear. But I was sitting there watching the interim superintendent and thinking, she doesn't even know if she has a job next year. And, the new superintendent, if it's her or if it's somebody else, they might not be into Montessori, or so they might realize, Montessori's great, but it's kind of expensive and we have other needs and we can't afford it anymore. So I can enroll in a program today that I think is fantastic, but is it still going to be there when she's in 3rd grade or 4th or 5th or 6th or 7th? I can enroll in a charter school, but what happens when enrollment drops and money gets tight and they start cutting programs, and then that school that I chose that seems so great right now isn't as good or isn't right anymore? So I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know if we're going to be in the Detroit schools, through elementary, through middle, through high school. There's just way too many unknown variables. But what I know right now is we're going to give it a try. We're going to give it a shot. We're going to find a local school and we're going to invest in it. So I lived in New York, and I love New York, but if you live in New York is the city that's kind of already there for you. It's already built, and you just kind of enjoy it. You consume it, but what struck me like that night at PJ's Lager House is that Detroit is this place that everybody kind of has to put into. Right? It's not a place where you can just come and everything's already built for you. You got to come here, or if you're already here, you have to be here and you have to invest. So we're gonna invest. We're gonna enroll in a local school. We're gonna get involved, PTA and after school tutoring or whatever. And and that's what I do for Chalkbeat. I'm a journalist, and what I try to do is I try to write about all the people who are trying to make our schools better, right? The teachers who are sacrificing, the parents who are sacrificing, who are committing, who are investing. And I'm writing about the people who are trying to make our schools better, and then the people and the policies that are standing in their way and making their jobs harder. So that's what I do as a journalist, to try to advance the idea that schools are getting better, or going to get better, that we need to make them better. And as a parent, I'm gonna do what's best for my kids. And that includes finding them a good education, but it also includes raising them in a city that works, or that's gonna work. And a city that's just, a city that's kind. And for us to get from where we are now to that city, we have to start changing this question. This, what are you gonna do about schools for your kid? This idea that education is 1,000 individual choices that individual people are going to make for their own children, and start talking about what are we going to do about the schools. And if we can do that, if we can change the conversation and actually start reaching some answers, then every parent can live wherever they want. And for me, for my family, right now, we want to live in Detroit.
Erin Einhorn, Chalkbeat Detroit.